Hey there, and welcome. Let me ask you something. When you hear the words military strategy, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of people, it's this idea of some ancient, secret set of rules, right? Like a checklist for winning. But what if I told you that whole idea isn't just wrong, it's actually dangerous? Today, we're going to dive into what strategic studies is really all about. And spoiler alert, it's not a list of rules, it's a way of thinking. And this quote from the strategist Bernard Brody just gets right to the heart of it. For centuries, military thinkers have been leaning on these so-called enduring principles. But Brody's point is that they haven't stuck around because they're so brilliant. Nope, they've survived because they're convenient. They're easy. They give you simple slogans instead of pushing you to do the hard work of actual flexible thinking. And that convenience? Well, that's where the myth of strategy comes from. We end up swapping out real hard thought for these easy slogans. And look, in a field where the stakes are literally life and death, that is a huge problem. So let's dig into why. Okay, check this out, because this slide just lays the whole problem bare. Take a classic principle like economy of effort. Sounds smart, right? But then you look at the official explanation. It tells you to have a balanced use of forces, judicious spending, and to concentrate at the decisive moment. But what does any of that actually mean? What's balanced? Who decides what's judicious or decisive? These words don't give you answers. They just throw more questions back at you. They're totally empty. So, okay, if strategy isn't a simple checklist, then what is it, right? Well, that's the thing. It's a discipline. It's all about learning how to think, not just memorizing what to think. And to do that, you need a guide. You need a real theory to show you the way. And nobody put it better than the legend himself, Karl von Clausewitz. He basically said, look, theory isn't a rule book you're supposed to flick through in the middle of a fight. Its job is to train your mind, to guide your own education, and to sharpen your judgment before you ever get there. It's about being able to handle the chaos and uncertainty of the real world. Think of it like building a mental muscle, a kind of strategic intuition, not just memorizing a bunch of formula. Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we train the mind? Well, that brings us to our first big idea, the first pillar of modern strategic thought, the challenge of making strategy a more rigorous, more analytical discipline. This is where Bernard Brody comes back in. He argued that to be of any real use, strategy had to move past all those fuzzy, vague principles. And his big idea? We should treat it like a social science, specifically like economics. And when you think about it, it kind of makes sense, right? Both are all about the same core problem. You've got limited stuff, resources, time, people, and you need to use it in the smartest, most efficient way possible to get what you want. And this example from Leyte Golf, man, it just shows the difference perfectly. You had Admiral Halsey, who was stuck on that old slogan, don't divide the fleet. So he sends everything after what turned out to be a decoy. Now, he did get the decoy, but he left a huge critical part of his force totally exposed. A more scientific approach would have asked a totally different question. What's the marginal utility here? In plain English, that's just, what's the real added value of sending one more ship on this chase compared to the value of leaving it behind to protect us? See the difference? That kind of question forces you to think about trade-offs. It leads to a much smarter, more rational choice. All right, so we've established that strategy needs to be analytical. It's about making smart calculations. But what exactly are we analyzing? And that leads us right into our second pillar, getting a real grip on what power actually is. And spoiler alert, it's a lot more than just guns and bombs. The scholar Lawrence Friedman has this incredible way of putting it. He says strategy isn't just about using the stuff you already have. It's the art of creating power. Now think about that for a second. That completely changes the game, doesn't it? Power isn't just a thing you have, like a pile of tanks. It's a relationship you build with your opponent to get what you want politically. And this relationship, this idea of power, it exists on a spectrum. On one end, you've got just raw brute force, literally stopping the other guy from doing something. Then in the middle, there's coercion. That's using threats to convince them that fighting you just isn't worth the trouble. But way over on the other end, the most efficient, the most stable form of power is authority. That's when your opponent willingly goes along with what you want because they see you as legitimate. The best strategy isn't about winning the fight. It's about creating a world where you don't even have to fight in the first place. Okay, so we need to think like a scientist, and we need to understand what power really is. But where do strategists get their data to do all this? Well, a lot of the time, they look to the past. And that brings up our third huge challenge, avoiding the history trap. You know that old saying, right? Those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it? Well, the historian William C. Fuller Jr. kind of turns that on its head. He says the real danger isn't that leaders ignore history, it's that they're obsessed with it, but they keep learning all the wrong lessons. The past, it turns out, is a terrible instruction manual for what's coming next. And Fuller points out two mental traps that people fall into all the time. First, there's what he calls linear projection. That's the super common mistake of assuming the next war is going to look exactly like the last one. Then there's this significant exception. This is when you see something in the past that completely contradicts your favorite theory and you just write it off. You say, oh, that was just a fluke, a weird one-off, we can ignore that. And yeah, you can imagine both of those are just recipes for absolute disaster. So let's recap. If strategy isn't some simple checklist, and if looking at history is actually super tricky, then what is the real art of strategy? What are we left with? And this is where it all clicks into place. Real strategy isn't a thing you memorize. It's a way you think. It's this blend of everything we've talked about, the scientific mindset of weighing costs and benefits, that deeper understanding of power as something you create, and a really careful, critical way of looking at the past, one that challenges your own assumptions instead of just looking for things that prove you right. And that's why all of this is so important. And not just for generals on a battlefield, but for all of us. This whole discipline of analyzing what you've got, of understanding your relationships, of learning from the past without being trapped by it, and making tough choices when you don't have all the answers, that is an incredibly powerful skill. It's a framework for thinking that can help pretty much anyone deal with the crazy, complex challenges we all face. So I guess the final question is, how are you going to use it?